I stood behind the mahogany bar of the Grandview Country Club's exclusive VIP lounge, polishing crystal glasses as golden afternoon sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. I'd worked here for 3 years, saving every penny from my bartending job to pursue my dream of opening my own wellness retreat. Today felt different, though. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer confirming the final paperwork went through this morning. I owned something now. Something big. Something that was about to change everything when Patricia Blackwood walked through those doors in exactly 10 minutes, expecting to be treated like royalty as always. The ornate double doors of the VIP lounge burst open with enough force to rattle the crystal chandelier overhead. Patricia Blackwood swept inside like a hurricane wrapped in luxury, her $10,000 mink coat flowing behind her like a royal cape. The sharp click of her designer heels against the polished marble floor announced her arrival to every corner of the room. She moved with the practiced arrogance of someone who had never been told no in her entire privileged existence. I continued polishing the Waterford crystal tumbler in my hands, watching her approach through my peripheral vision. Patricia's platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her emerald earrings caught the afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, sending sparkles across her surgically perfected face. Everything about her screamed money and entitlement, from her perfectly manicured nails to the way she carried herself like she owned every space she entered. "Erica," she snapped, treating my name like a command rather than an acknowledgement. Her voice carried that particular tone wealthy people used when addressing service staff, dripping with condescension and barely concealed impatience. "I need my usual champagne set up immediately." The Krug Clos d'Ambonnet, properly chilled with the Belgian chocolate truffles arranged exactly as I like them. I set down the crystal tumbler with deliberate care, meeting her gaze directly instead of averting my eyes as she expected. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackwood, but the VIP lounge is closing early today. I won't be able to provide full service this afternoon." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot upward in shock, as if I had just announced the earth was flat or gravity had stopped working. For a moment, complete silence filled the elegant space, broken only by the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Patricia's green eyes narrowed to slits, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she processed the unprecedented reality of being denied something she wanted. "Excuse me?" The words came out as a hiss, barely controlled fury seething beneath her polished exterior. "Did you just tell me no? Do you have any idea who I am?" "My husband Marcus owns half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. I could have you fired with a single phone call." I maintained my calm demeanor, continuing to organize the bar area with steady, methodical movements. Years of dealing with entitled club members had taught me the value of staying composed under pressure. "I understand your position, Mrs. Blackwood, but today's circumstances are different. The lounge needs to close early for operational reasons." That was apparently the final straw for Patricia's already frayed patience. Her face flushed crimson with rage, transforming her carefully maintained composure into something ugly and raw. Without warning, she grabbed the mink coat from her shoulders and hurled it directly at my face with surprising force. The heavy fur struck me like a soft but substantial projectile, knocking me backward into the shelves behind the bar. Glass crashed as expensive bottles tumbled from their carefully arranged positions. A bottle of 30-year-old scotch shattered against the marble floor, sending amber liquid and crystal shards in every direction. The sound echoed through the lounge like breaking bells, drawing startled gasps from the handful of other members scattered throughout the room. "Check my coat, sweetie!" Patricia shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made the crystal glasses ring in sympathy. "That's what you're here for. You're nothing but hired help, and you'll treat me with the respect I deserve." The mink coat lay in a crumpled heap among the broken glass and spilled liquor, its luxurious fur now stained with expensive alcohol. I stared down at the mess, feeling humiliation burn in my chest like acid. Around the lounge, other wealthy patrons had stopped their quiet conversations to watch the spectacle, their faces showing various expressions of embarrassment and curiosity. "Pick it up," Patricia commanded, pointing at her coat with a perfectly manicured finger. "Pick up my coat, clean up this mess you caused with your clumsiness, and apologize for your incompetence. Then get me my champagne service exactly as I ordered it." I looked at the coat, then back at Patricia's expectant face. The other club members continued watching in uncomfortable silence, none of them willing to intervene or defend someone they considered beneath their social circle. This was exactly the kind of behavior I had witnessed countless times during my 3 years working here. The casual cruelty that wealthy people inflicted on service workers because they believed their money gave them the right to treat others as less than human. "No," I said quietly, the single word cutting through the tension like a blade. Patricia's mouth fell open in absolute shock. In her entire pampered existence, she had probably never heard that word directed at her. Her face cycled through multiple expressions of disbelief, rage, and something approaching panic as she struggled to process this unprecedented defiance. "What did you just say to me?" she sputtered, her voice climbing higher with each word. "You insolent little nobody! Do you have any idea what kind of connections my husband has? What kind of power we wield in this community? I will have you destroyed. Your pathetic little bartending career will be over before dinner tonight." She fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to smear as perspiration beaded on her forehead. "I'm calling Marcus right now. He'll have you fired, blacklisted, and thrown out of this club so fast your head will spin. You'll never work in this town again." Patricia's fingers flew across her phone screen as she dialed her husband's direct line, putting the call on speaker so everyone in the lounge could hear her assert her dominance. The phone rang twice before a deep male voice answered with professional efficiency. "Marcus Blackwood speaking." "Marcus, darling?" Patricia cooed, instantly switching to a voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm at the club and there's been a terrible incident with one of the staff members. This worthless little bartender girl has been incredibly rude and disrespectful. She needs to be fired immediately for incompetence and attitude problems." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of rustling papers. "Which staff member are you referring to, Patricia?" "The bartender in the VIP lounge, Erica something. She's been completely insubordinate, refusing to provide proper service and showing a shocking lack of respect for club members. I demand she be terminated immediately." Another longer pause followed, during which I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "Patricia, I think there might be some misunderstanding. I'll be right over to sort this out." The line went dead, leaving Patricia with a satisfied smirk on her face. She crossed her arms over her designer blouse and looked at me with the triumphant expression of someone who had just played their winning card. The other club members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly anticipating the swift and brutal consequences that would follow. Within minutes, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the lounge. Marcus Blackwood strode through the doors, his expensive suit immaculate and his silver hair perfectly styled. Behind him followed Harold Thornton, the club's nervous manager, whose face was pale with obvious stress. Marcus surveyed the scene with sharp blue eyes, taking in the broken glass, spilled liquor, and his wife's rumpled coat lying among the debris. His expression remained carefully neutral, giving nothing away about his thoughts or intentions. "Patricia," he said evenly, "would you mind explaining exactly what happened here?" Patricia launched into a dramatic retelling of events, painting herself as the victim of unprovoked rudeness and deliberate destruction of property. She gestured wildly as she spoke, her voice rising and falling with theatrical emotion. According to her version, I had deliberately thrown her coat to the ground and broken the bottles out of spite and incompetence. When she finished her performance, Marcus turned to look at me with those penetrating blue eyes. Instead of the anger Patricia expected to see, however, his expression showed something more like puzzlement. He glanced at Harold, who was wringing his hands nervously beside him. "Harold," Marcus said slowly, "remind me again who we're dealing with here. There seems to be some confusion about the employment situation." Harold cleared his throat nervously, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to find the right words. His eyes darted between Patricia's expectant face and my calm demeanor, clearly uncomfortable with whatever he was about to reveal. "Well, sir," Harold stammered, "that's the thing. Erica isn't exactly an employee anymore. As of this morning, the club's board voted unanimously to accept a purchase offer for the entire property. The sale was finalized just a few hours ago." Patricia's triumphant expression began to fade around the edges, replaced by the first stirrings of uncertainty. "What are you talking about, Harold?" "What purchase offer?" Harold's face grew even paler as he continued. "The new owner took possession this morning, Mrs. Blackwood. All the paperwork was processed and filed with the county clerk's office before noon." Marcus turned to look at me with new interest, his sharp business mind clearly putting pieces together faster than his wife's. "And who exactly is this new owner, Harold?" The manager's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he delivered the bombshell that would change everything. "That would be Erica, sir. She's the one standing behind the bar." The silence that followed Harold's announcement was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop on the plush Persian carpet. Patricia's face went through a series of rapid transformations, cycling from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror as the implications began to sink in. Her mouth opened and closed several times like a fish gasping for air, but no sound emerged. Marcus, to his credit, recovered his composure more quickly than his wife. His businessman's instincts kicked in immediately, and he stepped forward with the kind of respectful attention he would give to any significant property owner. The shift in his demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable the way powerful people instinctively recognized and deferred to other forms of power. "I see," Marcus said carefully, his voice taking on the measured tone he probably used in board meetings. "Congratulations on your acquisition, miss." "Yeah." "Ashford," I supplied, enjoying the way Patricia's eyes widened even further at the mention of my last name. "Erica Ashford, and thank you, Mr. Blackwood. It's been quite a day." Harold wrung his hands more vigorously, clearly uncomfortable with the tension crackling through the elegant space. "Perhaps I should explain the circumstances," he offered nervously. "The club's board has been struggling with mounting debts for the past 18 months. Legal issues with our previous management company declining membership maintenance costs for a building this size. They voted unanimously this morning to accept Ms. Ashford's offer." Patricia found her voice at last, though it came out as a strangled croak. "That's impossible! Some bartender couldn't possibly afford to buy this place. This property has to be worth millions. You're lying." I reached into the leather messenger bag I kept behind the bar and withdrew a thick folder of documents. With deliberate care, I spread them across the polished mahogany surface where Patricia could see every official seal and signature. The deed transfer signed and notarized. Bank confirmation of funds transfer for $3.2 million. The board's unanimous resolution approving the sale. The purchase price was $3.2 million, I said calmly, watching Patricia's face grow paler with each document I revealed. "Paid in full this morning through First National Bank. The escrow closed at 10:15, and I took legal possession at 10:30. These are the signed transfer documents if you'd like to examine them." Patricia snatched up the nearest document with shaking hands, her perfectly manicured nails leaving small indentations in the expensive paper. She scanned the legal language with growing desperation, clearly hoping to find some flaw or forgery that would restore her crumbling worldview. But every signature was genuine, every seal properly notarized, every detail meticulously documented. "This is insane," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "Where would you get that kind of money? You're a bartender. You can't possibly have $3 million. I retrieved another folder from my bag, this one containing even more personal documents. My grandmother Eleanor left me a substantial inheritance when she passed away 6 months ago. Combined with a business loan secured by my wellness retreat business plan, it provided exactly the capital I needed. The moment I said my grandmother's name, something shifted in Patricia's expression. Recognition dawned slowly, followed immediately by a look of absolute panic. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own discarded mink coat. "Eleanor Ashford," she breathed, the name falling from her lips like a curse. "You're Eleanor Ashford's granddaughter." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly at this revelation, and I could see him making connections in his sharp businessman's mind. Everyone in town knew about Eleanor Ashford, the beloved philanthropist who had built half the charitable organizations in the county. Her foundation had funded hospitals, schools, shelters, and community centers. She had been one of those rare wealthy people who used her fortune to lift others up rather than keeping them down. "That's right," I confirmed, watching Patricia's face cycle through various expressions of horror and calculation. Grandmother Eleanor believed strongly in using privilege and resources to help working people achieve their dreams. Her will specifically stated that my inheritance should be used for exactly that purpose. Harold nodded enthusiastically, clearly relieved to be discussing something positive instead of the escalating conflict. Mrs. Ashford was wonderful to work with. She held several charity events here over the years, always insisting that the staff be treated with the utmost respect and generosity. Patricia's face had gone from pale to almost green as more memories surfaced. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she recalled her own interactions with my grandmother's charitable work. The recognition in her eyes told me everything I needed to know about those interactions. "You remember Grandmother Eleanor, don't you, Mrs. Blackwood?" I asked gently, though there was steel beneath the silk in my voice. "I believe you had some opinions about her philanthropic efforts." Marcus looked between his wife and me with growing concern, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. "Patricia, what's going on here?" Patricia's mouth worked silently for several moments before she managed to speak. "That woman was a bleeding heart who wasted perfectly good money on losers and degenerates," she said, her voice gaining strength as her anger overcame her shock. "She threw millions away on homeless shelters and job training programs for people too lazy to help themselves. It was disgusting." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Harold made a small sound of distress while Marcus closed his eyes briefly, as if recognizing the magnitude of his wife's mistake. Even the other club members who had been trying to pretend they weren't listening turned to stare openly at Patricia's stunning display of callousness. "I attended the Children's Hospital fundraising gala just last month," Patricia continued, apparently unable to stop herself now that she had started. "Your grandmother was there preaching about helping the unfortunate and supporting community programs. I told everyone who would listen that she was a foolish old woman throwing away good money that could be used for much better purposes." I felt my grandmother's presence in that moment, as if her spirit was standing right beside me, watching this confrontation unfold. Eleanor Ashford had dedicated her entire life to fighting exactly this kind of entitled cruelty. She had faced down bullies and bigots for decades, never backing down when someone needed defending. Grandmother Eleanor believed that true wealth meant having enough to share with others, I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of generations of family values. She also believed that entitled people needed to learn humility before they could understand their place in the world. Patricia's face twisted with renewed rage as the full implications of the situation finally hit her. Not only had she just humiliated herself in front of a room full of witnesses, but she had done it while attacking the granddaughter of one of the most respected philanthropists in the county. Worse still, that granddaughter now owned the very place where Patricia had expected to reign supreme. "This is all very interesting," Marcus interjected, clearly trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his wife's public meltdown. "But perhaps we should discuss this more privately. I'm sure we can come to some understanding that works for everyone." Before I could respond, Patricia exploded with renewed fury. "Understanding? There's nothing to understand. This little nobody has somehow conned her way into owning our club, and I will not stand for it. This is our place, our social circle, our world. She doesn't belong here, and she never will." The venom in her voice was shocking in its intensity, but it wasn't entirely surprising. I had seen glimpses of this ugliness during my 3 years working here, the casual cruelty that wealthy people showed when they thought no one important was watching. The difference was that now I was no longer powerless to fight back. "Actually, Mrs. Blackwood," I said with a smile that probably looked more dangerous than friendly, "this is my place now, and I think it's time we discussed some changes that need to be made." Patricia's transformation was immediate and terrifying to witness. Whatever thin veneer of civilized behavior she had been maintaining completely evaporated, revealing something raw and ugly underneath. Her perfectly applied makeup began to streak as perspiration mixed with fury, and her hands shook with barely contained rage. "Changes!" She spit, her voice rising to a shriek that made the crystal glasses sing in harmony. "You think you can waltz in here with your dead grandmother's blood money and change our world? This club has operated perfectly fine for 30 years, without input from bartenders and their charity cases." She began pacing back and forth in front of the bar like a caged animal, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. Other club members were now openly staring, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a spectacular public breakdown. "Let me tell you something about your precious grandmother." Patricia continued, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "Eleanor Ashford was a weak-minded fool who let herself be manipulated by every sob story and hard luck case that crossed her path. She threw away millions of dollars that could have been used to support worthy causes, real charity work that benefits people who actually deserve help." Harold made another distressed sound and attempted to intervene. "Mrs. Blackwood, perhaps we should step into my office to discuss this more privately." "Shut up, Harold," Patricia snapped without even looking at him. "This concerns everyone here. These people need to understand what's happening to their club, their sanctuary from the riffraff and undesirables that woman spent her life coddling." Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Patricia, that's enough. You're making a scene." "A scene?" Patricia whirled on her husband with wild eyes. "You want to see a scene? I'll show you a scene. This gold-digging little tramp thinks she can use dirty charity money to buy her way into respectable society, but I won't let that happen. Not in my club, not in my community." She pulled out her phone again and began dialing numbers with frantic energy. "I'm calling every member of the board, every influential family in this town. By the time I'm finished, no respectable person will set foot in this place as long as she owns it. I'll destroy her reputation, her business prospects, everything." The first call connected, and Patricia immediately launched into a venomous character assassination. "Margaret, darling, it's Patricia Blackwood. I'm calling with disturbing news about the country club. It's been sold to some kind of con artist who somehow manipulated that senile old Eleanor Ashford into leaving her money to a bartender." I could hear the confused voice on the other end of the line, but Patricia didn't pause to let them speak. "Yes, you heard correctly. Our beautiful club is now owned by hired help who thinks she can infiltrate our social circle through inheritance fraud. We cannot allow this travesty to stand." She ended that call and immediately began dialing another number, her movements becoming more frantic and uncontrolled. "Richard, it's Patricia. I need your help with a serious situation at the Grandview. Some woman has somehow cheated her way into ownership using questionable inheritance claims." Marcus grabbed his wife's arm, trying to stop her from making any more calls. "Patricia, stop this immediately. You're embarrassing yourself and potentially opening us up to legal liability with these accusations." Patricia jerked away from his grasp with such violence that she stumbled backward into a marble-topped side table. The impact sent a priceless Ming Dynasty vase crashing to the floor, where it exploded into thousands of blue and white ceramic fragments. "Don't you dare try to control me!" she screamed at Marcus, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I built my reputation in this town through years of careful cultivation and social networking. I will not let some nobody with a dead grandmother's checkbook destroy everything I've worked for." She turned back to me with murder in her eyes. "You think you've won something here, but you have no idea what kind of enemy you've made. I have connections you can't imagine, influence that reaches into every corner of this community. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are." In her growing hysteria, Patricia began grabbing expensive items from around the lounge and hurling them to the floor. A crystal decanter filled with aged brandy exploded against the marble, sending amber liquid and glass shards across the pristine surface. An antique silver serving tray crashed into the wall, leaving a significant dent in the mahogany paneling. "Every broken piece will come out of your pathetic salary," she shrieked, continuing her rampage of destruction. "You'll spend the rest of your miserable life paying for the damage you've caused to our beautiful sanctuary." Harold looked absolutely terrified as Patricia's breakdown accelerated. Club security hovered nearby, but seemed reluctant to physically intervene with someone of her social status. The other members watched in horrified fascination as one of their own completely lost control in spectacular fashion. "Mrs. Blackwood, please," Harold pleaded, wringing his hands desperately. "The other members are becoming concerned. Perhaps we should call your physician or arrange for private transportation home." "Concerned?" Patricia laughed, a harsh sound devoid of any real humor. "They should be concerned. They should be terrified. If this establishment can be taken over by working-class opportunists, none of their social positions are safe. Today it's a bartender with inheritance money. Tomorrow it could be gardeners and housekeepers demanding equal treatment." She grabbed an ornate crystal chandelier accent piece from a nearby table and raised it above her head like a weapon. "I won't let that happen. I've spent too many years building the perfect life, the perfect social circle, the perfect reputation. Some nobody granddaughter of a bleeding heart philanthropist will not destroy my world." But as Patricia prepared to hurl the crystal piece, her voice carried beyond her intended target. In her rage, she began revealing things that were never meant for public consumption, secrets that would prove far more damaging than any broken glassware. "Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed for this community?" she ranted, waving the crystal dangerously above her head. "How many charity events I've organized, how many fundraisers I've chaired. The Children's Hospital alone has received thousands of dollars through my personal efforts and connections." Her voice took on a bitter, resentful tone as she continued. "Thousands of my own money that I could have spent on myself, on things that actually matter. But no, I had to play the perfect philanthropist wife, attending boring hospital board meetings and pretending to care about sick children and their pathetic families." Marcus's face went completely white as he realized where his wife's tirade was heading. "Patricia, stop talking. Right now." But Patricia was beyond hearing him, lost in her own spiral of fury and self-pity. "Do you think I enjoyed sitting through those endless meetings, listening to doctors whine about needing new equipment and better facilities? The whole thing was tedious beyond belief, a complete waste of my valuable time." Harold had started recording the meltdown on his phone for security purposes, a standard protocol for incidents involving potential property damage. His hands shook as he held the device, clearly understanding that he was capturing something far more significant than a simple customer complaint. I deserved compensation for my time and effort, Patricia continued, her voice growing louder and more defiant. If some of the charity money found its way into my personal accounts to cover shopping trips and spa treatments, that was simply payment for services rendered. Those people should have been grateful for my involvement instead of scrutinizing every expense report. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, poisoning everything they touched. Complete silence fell over the lounge as everyone processed the magnitude of what Patricia had just confessed. Even she seemed to realize she had crossed a line, her face going pale as the implications of her admission began to sink in. Marcus stood frozen in absolute horror, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. The other club members looked equally shocked, their faces reflecting various degrees of disgust and disbelief. Harold's phone continued recording, capturing every damning word for posterity. In her blind rage and desperate need to justify her actions, Patricia Blackwood had just confessed to embezzling money from a children's hospital charity in front of a room full of witnesses. And thanks to Harold's security recording, there was now permanent evidence of her crimes. The silence that followed Patricia's confession lasted for what felt like an eternity. You could practically hear the gears turning in everyone's minds as they processed the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Patricia herself seemed frozen, her mouth hanging open as if she couldn't quite believe the words that had just come out of it. I set down the cloth I had been using to clean up broken glass and straightened to my full height, feeling the weight of my grandmother's legacy settling around my shoulders like a protective cloak. Eleanor Ashford had taught me that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty was simple, quiet dignity combined with decisive action. Well, I said calmly, my voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. This has been quite illuminating, Mrs. Blackwood. As the new owner of this establishment, I think it's time to implement some immediate policy changes. Patricia's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route, clearly beginning to understand the gravity of her situation. But her pride wouldn't let her back down, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of her own self-destruction. You can't do anything to me, she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. I'm a founding member of this club. I have lifetime membership privileges that can't be revoked by some upstart who bought her way in with inherited money. I walked around the bar with measured steps, moving like someone who owned not just the building, but every square inch of space within it. The other club members watched with rapt attention as I approached the wall near the main entrance where the club's membership charter hung in an ornate gold frame. Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, I think you'll find that membership privileges come with certain conditions, I said, pointing to a specific section of the beautifully calligraphed document. Section 12, subsection C, clearly states that membership can be revoked for conduct detrimental to the club's reputation and standing in the community. Patricia rushed over to read the charter herself, her face growing paler with each word. The legal language was clear and unambiguous. Members who engaged in illegal activities, caused public scandals, or brought disrepute to the establishment could have their privileges terminated immediately by the ownership. Furthermore, I continued pulling another document from my leather bag. Subsection F addresses destruction of club property and verbal abuse of staff members. Both carry automatic suspension pending review by the ownership. Harold nodded vigorously from his position near the windows, clearly relieved that someone was finally taking control of the situation. The charter has been in place for 30 years, Mrs. Blackwood. Every member signed acknowledgement of these terms when they joined. Patricia's face cycled through multiple expressions as she realized the legal noose tightening around her. This is discrimination, she said desperately. You can't single me out for punishment just because you don't like my political views or social positions. I'll sue this club into bankruptcy. Actually, I said with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. I can and I will. As of this moment, Patricia Blackwood, your membership in the Grandview Country Club is permanently revoked. You are banned from all club properties and activities effective immediately. The words hit Patricia like physical blows. She stumbled backward, grasping for the nearest chair to steady herself as the full implications sank in. Losing her country club membership wasn't just about losing access to golf and dining facilities. In her social circle, it represented complete banishment from the upper echelons of local society. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, her voice breaking with genuine panic for the first time. "This club is my life. My entire social network, my charitable work, my position in the community. Everything I am is tied to this place. Perhaps you should have considered that before confessing to embezzling money from sick children," I replied, my voice carrying the steel that my grandmother had taught me to use when facing down bullies, "and before destroying property and abusing staff members in front of multiple witnesses." Marcus, who had been standing in stunned silence throughout this exchange, finally found his voice. But instead of defending his wife as Patricia clearly expected, his words carried the weight of someone making difficult but necessary decisions. "Patricia," he said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation and something that might have been relief. "I think you need to know that our prenuptial agreement includes a morality clause regarding criminal behavior. If you're charged with embezzlement or any other felony, it triggers automatic divorce proceedings with minimal settlement provisions." Patricia whirled to face her husband, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "Marcus, you can't be serious. We've been married for 15 years. You can't just abandon me over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding." Marcus's voice carried a bitterness that suggested years of suppressed frustration. "You just confessed to stealing money from a children's hospital charity, Patricia, in front of witnesses on camera. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's a felony." He pulled out his own phone and began scrolling through contacts. "I've been looking for a way out of this marriage for years, if I'm being honest. Your cruelty, your casual racism, your treatment of anyone you consider beneath you. I've made excuses and covered for your behavior for far too long." Patricia's face crumpled as she realized the full scope of her destruction. Not only had she lost her precious club membership, but her marriage and financial security were crumbling around her as well. The perfect life she had built through manipulation and cruelty was disintegrating in real time. "You can't leave me," she pleaded, reaching for Marcus's arm. "I'll change. I'll get help. I'll make restitution to the hospital. Please don't do this." Marcus gently but firmly removed her hand from his sleeve. "It's too late, Patricia. I should have done this years ago when I first realized what kind of person you really were. I apologize to everyone here for enabling her behavior for so long." He turned to me with something approaching respect in his eyes. "Miss Ashford, I want you to know that not everyone in our social circle shares Patricia's views or approves of her methods. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman who made this community better through her generosity and compassion." With that, Marcus Blackwood walked toward the exit, leaving his wife standing alone in the wreckage of her former life. Patricia watched him go with desperate eyes, clearly understanding that her carefully constructed world was collapsing beyond any hope of repair. The other club members who had witnessed the entire spectacle began quietly gathering their belongings and moving toward the exit as well. Some looked embarrassed by Patricia's behavior, while others seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to her notorious bullying. None of them offered her support or sympathy as they filed out. Harold approached me with obvious relief written across his features. "Miss Ashford, would you like me to contact club security to escort Mrs. Blackwood from the premises? We should also probably notify local law enforcement about the confession we just heard." I looked at Patricia, who stood among the broken glass and spilled liquor like a fallen queen surveying her ruined kingdom. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. Then I remembered all the service workers she had humiliated over the years, all the charitable causes she had mocked, all the vulnerable people she had hurt with her casual cruelty. "Yes, Harold," I said firmly. "Please call the police. I believe they'll be very interested in reviewing that security footage you've been recording." As Harold reached for his phone, Patricia's last thread of self-control finally snapped completely. But instead of collapsing in defeat, she rallied for one final desperate assault on the dignity and composure that had served as her armor for so many years. Within 20 minutes, the elegant VIP lounge had been transformed into an impromptu crime scene investigation center. Detective Sarah Chen arrived first, her practical navy suit and sensible shoes, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings of crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs. She moved with the efficient confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with wealthy people who believed their money could buy them immunity from consequences. Patricia had spent those 20 minutes alternating between frantic phone calls to her attorney and desperate attempts to convince anyone who would listen that her confession had been taken out of context. But Harold's security footage told a different story, and Detective Chen reviewed it with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every variety of criminal rationalization. "Mrs. Blackwood," Detective Chen said after viewing the recording twice, "I need to ask you some questions about your statements regarding the Children's Hospital charity funds. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to an attorney." Patricia's lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Gregory Walsh, who specialized in defending wealthy clients, had arrived just as the detective finished reading the Miranda rights. He whispered urgently in Patricia's ear, clearly advising her to stop talking immediately, but Patricia's ego wouldn't allow her to admit that she needed legal protection. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding." Patricia insisted, her voice taking on the wheedling tone of someone accustomed to talking her way out of trouble. "I was upset and emotional. People say things they don't mean when they're under stress." Detective Chen made notes in a small leather notebook, her expression remaining carefully neutral. "So, you're saying that your statements about charity money finding its way into your personal accounts were not accurate?" Gregory Walsh placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. "Detective, my client has nothing further to say at this time. Any additional questions should be directed through my office." But before Patricia could follow her lawyer's advice, I stepped forward with another folder of documents that I had been quietly preparing while she ranted. Detective Chen looked at me with curious interest as I approached. "Detective Chen," I said respectfully, "I believe I have some information that might be relevant to your investigation. My grandmother, Eleanor Ashford, was actively researching financial irregularities at several local charities before her death 6 months ago." Patricia's face went white as fresh snow as I opened the folder and began spreading documents across the mahogany bar. Financial statements, bank records, correspondence with whistleblowers, detailed notes in my grandmother's careful handwriting. It was clear that Eleanor Ashford had been conducting a thorough investigation into charitable fraud in the area. Grandmother Eleanor received reports from hospital staff members who noticed unusual patterns, I explained, watching Patricia's lawyer frantically scribble notes. "Expensive handbags and jewelry appearing right after major fundraising events. Shopping trips to New York and Paris charged to charity credit cards. Spa treatments and salon visits listed as administrative expenses." Detective Chen examined the documents with growing interest. The evidence was meticulously organized and professionally documented, suggesting months of careful investigation by someone who understood how financial crimes worked. Bank statements showed clear patterns of money moving from charity accounts to Patricia's personal credit cards. These records show nearly $200,000 in questionable expenditures over the past 18 months. Detective Chen noted, comparing Eleanor's documentation to her own investigative files. "This matches information we've been gathering as part of an ongoing federal investigation into charitable fraud." Patricia made a strangled sound and swayed on her feet, forced to grab the nearest chair for support. Gregory Walsh's face had gone grim as he realized the scope of evidence arrayed against his client. This wasn't a case of emotional outbursts that could be explained away. This was documented financial crime with paper trails and witness statements. Mrs. Blackwood, Detective Chen continued, we've actually been building a case against you for several months based on whistleblower reports from Children's Hospital staff. They noticed that charity equipment purchases never seemed to materialize despite significant funds being allocated for them. Harold stepped forward nervously, still clutching his phone with the recorded confession.
Detective, I have the complete security footage from today's incident. Mrs. Blackwood explicitly stated that she deserved compensation for her charity work and that money found its way into her personal accounts.
Detective Chen nodded and made another note. We'll need copies of all security footage from today, as well as any other incidents involving Mrs. Blackwood that might have been recorded. Gregory Walsh tried one more time to control the situation.
Detective, I strongly advise that any further questioning of my client be conducted at your office with proper legal representation present.
But Detective Chen was already reaching for her handcuffs, clearly having seen enough evidence to justify an arrest. Patricia Blackwood, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and theft of charitable funds. You have the right to remain silent. Patricia's legs gave out completely as the handcuffs clicked into place. She collapsed into the chair she had been clutching, her perfectly coiffed hair disheveled and her designer makeup streaking down her cheeks in black rivulets. The transformation from imperious socialite to criminal defendant was complete and devastating. As Detective Chen led Patricia toward the exit, news reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story began gathering outside the club's main entrance. Camera crews set up equipment while journalists prepared for what was clearly going to be a major local story, the arrest of a prominent socialite for stealing from sick children. Marcus reappeared in the lounge just as his wife was being taken away in handcuffs. He watched the procession with an expression of profound sadness mixed with obvious relief. When the detective paused to speak with him, he handed over a set of keys and what appeared to be financial documents. These are Patricia's personal vehicle keys and bank account information, Marcus told Detective Chen quietly. I'm also providing authorization for you to search our home for any evidence of charitable fraud. I want full cooperation with your investigation. After the police and reporters departed, an unusual quiet settled over the Grandview Country Club. Harold began coordinating cleanup crews to deal with the broken glass and damaged property while I stood behind the bar processing everything that had just happened. The folder containing my grandmother's investigation materials remained spread across the mahogany surface, testament to Eleanor Ashford's dedication to fighting injustice even after her death. Looking at her careful documentation and witness statements, I realized that today's confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Patricia decided to steal from sick children. My phone buzzed with a text message from my attorney confirming that the club's insurance would cover all property damage from Patricia's rampage. Another message from the bank verified that my business loan had been officially approved for the wellness center renovation project I had planned. But the most meaningful communication came in the form of a handwritten letter that Harold discovered in my grandmother's former office upstairs. Eleanor Ashford had written it shortly before her death, apparently anticipating that someday her granddaughter would need guidance in fighting the same battles that had consumed much of her own life. My dear Erica, the letter began in grandmother's elegant script. If you're reading this, then you've encountered the kind of entitled cruelty that I spent my life fighting against. Remember that true power comes not from money or social position, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous. The letter continued with specific instructions about charitable fraud investigations, witness protection procedures, and legal strategies for holding powerful people accountable for their crimes. Eleanor Ashford had been preparing her granddaughter for this moment without ever explicitly saying so. As I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bag, I felt the weight of responsibility and opportunity settling around my shoulders. The Grandview Country Club would become something new under my ownership, something that honored my grandmother's legacy while building a more just and equitable community. The story broke on the evening news that same day with footage of Patricia being led away in handcuffs, playing on every local television station. The headlines were brutal and unforgiving. Socialite arrested for Children's Hospital charity fraud. Country club drama ends in felony charges. Wealthy wife steals from sick kids. By the time the morning newspapers hit the stands, Patricia Blackwood had become the most infamous person in the county. Editorial writers condemned her actions in scathing terms, while investigative reporters began digging deeper into other charities she had been involved with over the years. The story had everything that captured public attention: wealthy privilege, stolen money meant for sick children, and spectacular public downfall. The Children's Hospital Charity Board held an emergency meeting that evening, voting unanimously to remove Patricia from all positions and demanding full restitution of stolen funds. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the hospital's chief administrator, held a press conference announcing that they would be implementing new financial oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. "We trusted Mrs. Blackwood based on her social standing and apparent commitment to our cause," Dr. Morrison said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "That trust was betrayed in the most devastating way possible. These funds were meant to purchase life-saving equipment for critically ill children." Marcus Blackwood filed for divorce that same afternoon, citing the morality clause in their prenuptial agreement. His attorney released a statement emphasizing Marcus's commitment to cooperating fully with law enforcement and his intention to donate his share of their marital assets to establish the Eleanor Ashford Foundation for Working Families. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed, aided by the overwhelming evidence Eleanor had compiled and Patricia's recorded confession. Within 72 hours, FBI agents had executed search warrants on Patricia's home vehicles and personal bank accounts. They discovered additional evidence of fraud involving at least 3 other local charities, but perhaps the most damaging development came from an unexpected source: other wealthy club members who had witnessed Patricia's behavior over the years. Emboldened by her arrest and the clear message that wealth couldn't provide immunity from consequences, they began coming forward with their own stories of her cruelty and misconduct. Margaret Whitfield, wife of a prominent attorney, told reporters about Patricia's treatment of restaurant servers and hotel staff during charity events. She would deliberately spill drinks and food, then force the workers to clean it up while she berated them about their incompetence. It was humiliating to watch, but we all stayed silent because of her social position. Robert Sterling, a real estate developer, described Patricia's habit of refusing to pay bills for services provided by working-class contractors and vendors. She would find ridiculous excuses to withhold payment for months, knowing that these small business owners couldn't afford to sue her. It was economic bullying, pure and simple. The stories painted a picture of systematic abuse of power that went far beyond simple charity fraud. Patricia had used her wealth and social position as weapons against anyone she considered beneath her, secure in the knowledge that her victims had no recourse against someone of her standing. Local newspapers began publishing op-ed pieces about the broader implications of Patricia's case. Community leaders wrote about the need for better oversight of charitable organizations and stronger protections for service workers who faced abuse from wealthy customers. The conversation expanded beyond one woman's crimes to address systemic issues of privilege and accountability. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation revealed the full scope of Patricia's financial crimes. Agent Rebecca Torres held a press conference detailing charges that included embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. The total amount stolen from various charities exceeded $400,000 over a 3-year period. Mrs. Blackwood used sophisticated methods to hide her theft, Agent Torres explained. False invoices for non-existent services, kickback schemes with vendors, and direct transfers to personal accounts disguised as legitimate administrative expenses. This was not impulsive behavior, but carefully planned criminal enterprise. The federal charges carried potential prison sentences of up to 20 years, effectively guaranteeing that Patricia would spend significant time behind bars, regardless of any plea negotiations. Gregory Walsh. Her high-priced attorney began making quiet inquiries about cooperation agreements and reduced sentencing in exchange for information about other potential charity fraud in the area. Back at the Grandview Country Club, I found myself dealing with an unexpected wave of support from club members who had remained silent during Patricia's reign of terror. They approached me with genuine apologies and offers of assistance as I began planning renovations to transform the facility into a community wellness center. Dr. James Harrison, a retired physician who had served on several charity boards, was particularly helpful in explaining how Patricia had manipulated financial reporting to hide her theft. "She was very clever about it," he admitted sadly. "Small amounts taken regularly disguised as legitimate expenses spread across multiple organizations. Without your grandmother's investigation, we might never have caught her." The renovation plans I had developed with my architect began to take shape as a vision of what the facility could become. The exclusive dining rooms would be converted into affordable family dining areas. The private lounges would become study spaces and meeting rooms for community organizations. The golf course would remain, but with significantly reduced fees and scholarship programs for young players from working families. Most importantly, the staff would be treated as valued team members rather than invisible servants. I implemented immediate pay raises, comprehensive health insurance, and profit-sharing programs that gave every employee a stake in the center's success. The transformation in morale was visible within days as workers who had endured years of abuse finally felt respected and valued. Harold Thornton proved invaluable during this transition period, his intimate knowledge of club operations helping to ensure smooth continuity of services. But more than that, he seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity to be part of something positive rather than enabling the cruelty and exclusivity that had characterized Patricia's era. "I've worked in hospitality for 25 years, Harold told me during one of our planning sessions, and I've never been more proud of where I work than I am right now. What you're creating here honors your grandmother's memory in the most beautiful way possible." As news of the transformation spread through the community, membership applications began pouring in from teachers, nurses, firefighters, social workers, and other professionals who had never been able to afford country club fees. The waiting list grew to over 200 families within the first month, validation that there was huge demand for an inclusive community space. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the Ashford Community Wellness Center, contrasting the new mission with the exclusivity and elitism that had previously defined the club. The article quoted several new members expressing gratitude for finally having access to facilities and programs that had been reserved for the wealthy elite. Patricia's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 months away, but her conviction was essentially guaranteed given the overwhelming evidence and her recorded confession. Legal experts predicted she would receive the maximum sentence due to the particularly egregious nature of stealing from children's charities and her complete lack of remorse. As I stood in the renovated lounge where this entire confrontation had begun, I felt my grandmother's presence more strongly than ever. Eleanor Ashford had spent her life fighting for justice and equality, often facing criticism and resistance from people exactly like Patricia Blackwood. Now her granddaughter was continuing that fight, using the tools and resources she had provided to build something better. 6 months after Patricia Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, the transformation of the Grandview Country Club into the Ashford Community Wellness Center was complete. What had once been an exclusive enclave for the wealthy elite had become a thriving community space where teachers worked out alongside tech executives, where firefighters' children took swimming lessons with doctors' kids, and where respect and kindness mattered more than bank account balances or social connections. The morning of Patricia's sentencing hearing, I stood in the main dining room watching diverse families enjoy breakfast together at tables where racist jokes and classist commentary had once been the standard conversation. The contrast was striking and deeply satisfying. Elementary school teacher Maria Rodriguez was helping her twin daughters with homework, while tech entrepreneur David Kim discussed community garden plans with retired nurse Janet Thompson. This was the kind of community my grandmother had always envisioned. The federal courthouse was packed when Patricia finally faced Judge Catherine Williams for sentencing. Agent Rebecca Torres had presented evidence showing that Patricia's theft from multiple charities totaled over $400,000 money that had been intended for medical equipment, educational programs, and emergency assistance for struggling families. The human cost of her greed was documented in painful detail through victim impact statements. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison spoke on behalf of Children's Hospital describing life-saving equipment that couldn't be purchased because of stolen funds. Mrs. Blackwood's actions directly impacted our ability to care for critically ill children. While she was using charity money for luxury shopping trips and spa treatments, families were struggling to afford their children's medical care. Patricia's appearance had changed dramatically during her months in county jail awaiting trial. Gone were the designer clothes, and perfect makeup replaced by an orange jumpsuit, and the hollow-eyed look of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away. Her attorney argued for minimum sentencing based on her cooperation with ongoing investigations, but the judge was unmoved by appeals for mercy.
Mrs. Blackwood,
Judge Williams said sternly, "You systematically stole from organizations dedicated to helping the most vulnerable members of our community. Your victims were children fighting for their lives, families struggling with poverty, and elderly people needing basic care. This court finds no mitigating circumstances that justify reducing the maximum sentence." Patricia received 15 years in federal prison, plus complete restitution of stolen funds, effectively ensuring she would spend her remaining productive years behind bars. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back once at the courtroom gallery filled with her former victims and the community members whose lives she had tried to destroy through her cruelty and greed. Marcus Blackwood kept his promise to establish the Eleanor Ashford Foundation for Working Families, contributing $5 million from his divorce settlement to fund educational scholarships, emergency assistance programs, and small business loans for people pursuing their dreams despite financial obstacles. The foundation's first round of grants supported 23 families, including single mothers pursuing nursing degrees and military veterans starting construction companies. The success of the Ashford Community Wellness Center exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Membership grew to over 800 families representing every profession and income level in the county. The facility hosted community meetings, cultural events, educational workshops, and celebration dinners that brought together people who might never have interacted under the old exclusivity model. Harold Thornton was promoted to general manager with a generous salary and comprehensive benefits package that reflected his value as both an operational expert and a moral leader. Under his guidance, the staff transformed from invisible servants into respected professionals who took genuine pride in creating positive experiences for every member and visitor. The wellness programs I had always dreamed of implementing flourished beyond my expectations. Mental health counseling services, addiction recovery support groups, financial literacy classes, and job training workshops filled needs that had been ignored by traditional country clubs focused solely on recreation for the wealthy. These programs were funded through a combination of member fees, community grants, and donations from people who believed in the center's inclusive mission. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was in the culture of respect and dignity that permeated every interaction at the center. Children learned that treating service workers with kindness was just as important as academic achievement. Adults modeled inclusive behavior that their kids carried into schools and neighborhoods. The ripple effects of Eleanor Ashford's vision spread throughout the community in ways that couldn't be measured in financial reports. Local businesses began requesting partnerships with the center, recognizing that an inclusive community space attracted diverse customers and talented employees. The economic impact extended far beyond our membership fees, as restaurants, shops, and service providers benefited from the increased foot traffic and positive community relations. 1 year after Patricia's arrest, I received a handwritten letter from Dr. Morrison at Children's Hospital. The stolen funds had been fully recovered through Patricia's restitution payments and FBI asset seizures, allowing the hospital to purchase the life-saving equipment they had been forced to delay. More importantly, the publicity surrounding the case had sparked increased community donations and volunteer involvement. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Dr. Morrison wrote. Her investigation not only brought a criminal to justice, but also inspired a new level of community engagement with our mission. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind people of what really matters. As I read that letter while sitting in my grandmother's former office, now converted into a community resource center, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from honoring a legacy while creating something new and valuable. The Ashford Community Wellness Center had become exactly what Eleanor Ashford envisioned: a place where everyone was welcome, where dignity and respect were universal values, and where individual success was measured by contribution to community well-being. The final vindication came when the center received the state's Community Impact Award for innovative programming that bridged social and economic divides. The ceremony was held in our main ballroom, the same space where Patricia had once held court over her empire of exclusivity and cruelty. Now it hosted an integrated celebration where government officials, business leaders, and working families mingled together as genuine equals. Standing at the podium where I had once served drinks to people who treated me as invisible, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. My grandmother's inheritance had provided the financial resources, but her moral example had given me the courage to fight for justice, even when it seemed impossible. Patricia Blackwood's spectacular downfall had cleared the way for positive change, but the real work was in building something better to replace what had been torn down. True power. I told the diverse audience gathered in that transformed space, comes not from money or social position, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous. My grandmother Eleanor believed that privilege should be used to lift others up rather than keep them down. This center exists to prove that her vision of community and inclusion is not only possible, but profitable and sustainable. The applause that followed wasn't just appreciation for my words, but celebration of a community that had chosen dignity over discrimination, inclusion over exclusivity, and justice over the comfortable silence that enables cruelty to flourish. As the evening wound down and families began heading home to neighborhoods throughout the county, I walked through the facility one more time, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure. In the quiet moments after a successful event, I could feel my grandmother's presence most strongly, as if her spirit approved of what we had built together. The Ashford Community Wellness Center had become more than a business venture or even a memorial to Eleanor Ashford's legacy. It was proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they had the courage to challenge injustice and the persistence to build something better in its place. Looking back on that dramatic afternoon when Patricia Blackwood threw her mink coat at my face, I realized that her moment of entitled cruelty had actually been the catalyst for everything positive that followed. Without her spectacular meltdown and criminal confession, the community might never have seen the need for change or the possibility of something better. Sometimes the worst behavior from the worst people creates opportunities for the best people to show what they're really capable of achieving. Patricia's legacy would be prison time and public disgrace, but my grandmother's legacy lived on in every family that found community at the center. Every worker who was treated with dignity, and every child who learned that kindness was more valuable than wealth. The center's motto, carved in marble above the entrance where Patricia had once made her grand entrances, read simply, "Dignity, Respect, Community." These weren't just words on a wall, but living principles that guided every decision and interaction within our transformed space. As I locked the front doors and headed home to plan tomorrow's programming, I carried with me the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served, positive change had been achieved, and my grandmother's dream of a more equitable community was becoming reality one day at a time. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone's cruel behavior actually opened the door for positive change in your community? How do you think privilege and wealth should be used to benefit others rather than excluding them? I'd love to hear your thoughts about standing up to injustice and building inclusive communities in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story about transforming pain into purpose and cruelty into community. If this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for what's right. Remember that every act of courage, no matter how small, contributes to building a more just and compassionate world where everyone's dignity is respected and protected.